Hi, welcome to Lesson 5. Today we're going to take a look at transforming artwork in Illustrator. So what we'll do is we'll take a look at adding, editing, renaming, adjusting artboards, so how we've been able to create art and kind of arrange them on separate pieces within a single document. We'll take a look at navigating them, working with rulers and guides and what that kind of does for you. We'll take a look at positioning objects with precision, getting them exactly where we want them. We'll also take a look at some of the transformational tools like moving, scaling, rotating, shearing. We'll take a look at mirror repeating, which is kind of a cool little process that's built into Illustrator, and then working with the Puppet Warp tool. So for today's lesson, everything is available for you on Blackboard. So if you jump in, it'll be under the Lesson 5 folder. You'll need the start file for this week, which will be a zip file. I'll give you this right here, the bus and Lesson 5 start. And then you'll also need the extension project file. I have a start file for you. It's called pixel art. So I have an example file that I'm going to kind of demo some steps for you on, and then I'll walk you through what that actually looks like and what you'll be creating with it. So to get started, we're going to jump into Illustrator and we're going to take a look at these two start files here. We've got this lesson 5 start file, so it looks like it kind of got like this incomplete piece. We also have this file called bus.ai, and what we want to do is we want to get all this stuff arranged into kind of single or multiple artboards within a single document. If you remember the Artboard tool, it's this one right here. What that allows you to do is create separate pieces or canvases for your documents to work on. The advantage of working with Artboards is that you can then set up multiple documents on a single page or in a single file. So when I'm done with this, I can output this as a PDF and all the artboards will be embedded into one big file instead of having to save them out separately as JPEGs. You can still work with JPEGs, but if you're saving them out, the issue you run into is one JPEG is one image, so you can't embed multiple pieces. So you got to make sure you have the Artboard tool selected when you're saving each of those individual artboards out as pages. But again, that's kind of the power of working with that PDF format, is it lets you kind of stack multiple pieces within your document. So what I want to take a look at first is when I have the Artboard tool selected, I'm going to make sure I have my properties panel open for this as well, just so that as I'm working, I can kind of see everything that I need. When I select an artboard in the properties panel, it's going to show me how big that artboard is. So right now it's got my width and my height, so it's 336 pixels wide, 310 tall. It also shows me kind of from this transformational axis where the center point is, that type of thing. The other thing I want to take a look at right away is I want to make sure I can see my rulers. So if you haven't seen those, you can go to your view menu and you can show your rulers. So if you take a look, this is all this view menu does, is kind of show you different ways of viewing things, right? So if I start scrolling all the way down, I can show rulers, and the advantage is they're going to give me a reference point, so I can kind of see. So here I'm at that 0 point. I can tell I'm at the 0 point by clicking and dragging over and snapping it right onto that margin, and it resets my 0 points. So now if I measure over, yeah, it looks about right, around 340 pixels or so. So when I have the Artboard tool selected, what it lets me do is make some adjustments to it. So like for Artboard 1, I could even rename this thing. So say that I wanted to call this Beaches Artboard. And I can also go in and I can click from the corner and I can start adjusting the size of my artboard. So maybe this artboard is a little bit too big for the art. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to click and drag up a little bit, and it'll reset my artboard to 336 by 280 pixels. And that's what I'm going to want to do, is keep all my artboards the same size. So if I wanted to create a new artboard, all I'm going to do is click and drag. And here it shows me some dimensions. Now I can try and guess, but because if I click on this artboard, it's saying any hidden lock will not be moved. That's fine. Just give me a little warning. Here I can go back 336 by 280. So if I come back to this, I can do the exact same, 336 by 280. And now I've got an exact duplicate as far as size goes for that. So I can set this over here. Now notice that when art is dropped in an artboard, it picks it up. It kind of drags it along with it. And I really liked this one. I think that my sizing is good here. So I can just, again, create the same thing. And again, if I want to click and drag it, I can kind of set it up that way. I've even, if you're working quickly, maybe you snap the top. And you can see here, I can snap the bottom, and it allows that snapping turned on. So if you're not working with exact dimensions, or you're not going to take the time to measure them, you can always just use snapping to create artboards for that as well. So that's really the idea of artboards. Now, once you have your artboards there, you could name them, you can set presets, you could create new ones. There's a whole artboard option panel. So if I wanted to show center marks or crosshairs, or if I'm going to use video safe areas like I was doing editing for video, that's all available right there. But that's really the idea of artboards. Now, again, once I have them, I'm not stuck. I can pick them up and move them. So like here, if I grab this artboard, it grabs everything along with it, except for locked objects. And it looks like I have a locked object back behind it. So if I went to my object and I do unlock all, now it's going to grab the whole thing along with it. So if I don't like where my artboards are, if I want to rearrange them, if I want to rename them, I can do all that. But again, artboards are pretty straightforward. It's just a matter of knowing that you're going to be grabbing this tool to create new ones or to go back in and edit them. And that we can, from this properties panel, we can get into some precision editing. So maybe we wanted it exactly 280 pixels. And same thing here. I've got them all set. So now they're all precise and all measured the exact same way. Now, what I'd like to do next is I'd like to go back into that bus file. So that was the other one that we grabbed, and I got this bus here, and I've got this palm tree. I'm gonna grab all this stuff, and I'm gonna copy it. And the nice part about Illustrator is you can just copy vector art right from one document into another. So if I paste it in here, yep, I can merge swatches, that's okay. I got a couple of different similar color swatches. I'm just gonna merge those together. And now I've kind of got all these different pieces. So now that this is placed in here, what I wanna do is I'm gonna start kind of getting all my art put into separate areas here. So I'm going to take this van and I'm going to put it up here. And what I want to do is I want to scale this up. I want to make this bigger. Now there's a couple different ways we can play around with scaling, and that's something we can control right from here in our properties panel. Here, if we wanted to lock and make something an exact width or an exact height, we could do that. I've got multiple pieces selected here. Let me ungroup this. I'm going to Command Shift G or right click and ungroup. I'm going to pull this palm tree out of here, and I'm going to re-grab all this stuff, and I'm going to again group this. What I want to do is I want to make this the exact same size as the artboard. So because I have the art all selected, and if I reference back, my artboard I know is 336 by 280. And it looks like mine was a little off there. So let me make sure it's exact. 336, 280. I can actually take my art, I can make my art an exact size too. So here, if I set it to 336, it scales it exactly to that size. And because I have this little lock icon, it's going to make sure that my height and my width remain proportional. So just like that, it snaps right onto the size of that artboard. So that's giving me exactly what I'm looking for there. Once I have that all taken care of, what I want to take a look at next is kind of playing around with maybe creating some guides for myself. The nice part of working with rulers is here, as I select through art on different artboards, notice my little 0 point resets. So if I'm measuring out anything, anytime I select a new artboard, it knows to create that 0 point from the top left of that document. Now what I can also do is I can create little guidelines for myself. So say that I wanted something to, let me select this artboard here, and I see my 0 point. So maybe what I wanted to do is I wanted to create a little guide. I can click inside this ruler area and drag over and say I wanted to go right about here. It's going to create this little guideline, so I can use this as a reference point. So here, this is going to take me to 20 pixels. So maybe if I wanted to make sure I was moving something to an exact point, I can create those guides. Now, to see these guides, we can hide them, we can lock them, we can unlock them. Guides are not permanent and they're not art. They're not going to appear on your documents. So when you're done, or if you don't want to work with a guide anymore, remember you can just hide your guides. Or if I want to kind of come back and see them again, I can show them. Or if I don't want any more guides anymore, I can go to my view menu, right down to my guides menu, and I can clear those out of there. So if you do want to work with guides, that's a nice way of kind of keeping things aligned. And even if, especially when you're working with larger scale documents, so that as you go down the left and right sides of a document, that you have kind of nice even tensions and even alignments on either side. Now, what I want to take a look at now that we've got kind of some of these basic ideas down is getting all of this stuff kind of put together. We're going to leave these trees. We're going to kind of do something a little bit different with them. But I want to bring this in here. And you're seeing, like, again, this thing is just way too big. So again, let's take a look at what this looks like if I set it to 336. It looks like because I have this extra stuff hanging off the edge, it didn't snap right to it. So again, what I can do is I don't have to scale with an exact number. I can also just freeform scale. The key here is that when I have the object selected, I've got my bounding box. I'm going to hold my shift key, and I'm just going to make sure that I'm holding my shift key so that it scales everything proportionally, so I don't end up with skewing. If you don't hold your shift key, you're going to get this weird scaling, stretching, and skewing. You want to avoid that anytime you're working with creating art or modifying anything that already exists. So now that we've got this taken care of, what I want to take a look at next is maybe doing some individual pieces. I've got this little group here of this text and this block. Maybe I want to make this a little bit bigger so I can hold my shift key. Maybe I want to scale this up a little bit more, kind of want a bigger headline. This looks like it's almost going to be like a little bit of a call to action. And because now I've got this headline here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to set a little guide along the top, and I'm going to do the same thing. Let me ungroup my art, and I'm going to shift click, and I'm going to scale this up just so that it touches that guideline that I just built. So now that I'm ending up with similar sizing and everything. Looks like it's not quite there. If I ever run into a situation where it's not scaling exactly how I want, I'll go back in, zoom in a little bit, and again, I'll just hold my shift key, and notice that now that I'm zoomed in, it's going to give me a little bit more precision with my editing. So now I can zoom out, use my hand tool to kind of pull back here and reposition my area. Now, the other thing that we can do is if we have a lot of art, we can also position with this properties panel. So here how I've got all my objects selected. Say that I wanted to reset where it sits on the X and the Y axis. And because this is a big group, maybe I want to reset this to 100. I can shift it off the artboard a little bit. Or maybe I needed to set it at an exact number, like maybe I needed to set at exactly 200 pixels. Then I can adjust that way as well. So again, when you're working with all these objects, there's still options for you to adjust them visually or in exact areas using these transform tools. As you're working, I generally recommend keeping objects or keeping your properties panel open because there's a lot of extra kind of editing and adjusting that you can do from it, and it doesn't take up a whole ton of room. And honestly too, what you might end up doing as you kind of get further along, there's just kind of similar pieces that I always end up using, so you can kind of dock these different panels. Like I'm always using color and color guide swatches. I'll always be pulling open my properties, so you'll see if you're working under that Essentials Classic, and remember it's Window Workspace Essentials Classic, that's going to give you kind of the easiest, in my opinion, way to view the work panel. What I want to look at now is doing a little bit more, and I'm going to zoom in on this object here, and I want to play around with scaling a little bit. So when I select these objects, I'm going to click and drag, and I don't want to grab the shadow. I just want to grab this. Actually, let's grab all this. Let's scale this whole thing down. I'm going to select this whole thing, and then what I can do is I can use a couple different tools that are built in my toolbar. I have a scale, a shear, and a reshape tool, and we already saw that reshape tool in one of the prior lessons. The shearing tool is going to kind of let me add an angle to things, and the scaling tool is going to let me make things bigger or smaller, and this is a way I can do it precisely. To the left of that, you'll see a rotate and reflect tool, and the rotate tool is how we can rotate things to very specific degrees. So this is going to give us kind of some of that control. Now what I want to do is I'm going to go to my scale tool, and rather than clicking and dragging, what I want to do is double click on the scale tool, and it's going to pop open a box, and it's going to ask me, well, how do I want to scale this thing? I want to scale it uniformly, and I want to make it smaller. I want to get it to about 40% its original size. I want it to be like a little plant that's going to sit there. So I'll click OK, and now I've got a nice uniform scale that makes it to that exact size. Same thing with that rotate tool. Let's take a look at that. I'm going to grab this palm tree, and let's put a little bit of a rotation on this thing. Now, when I come over to my rotate tool, I could just click once and start rotating, but it rotates on this little center point, center axis. So rather than doing that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to click down on the object. You see how it puts that little circle right there? Now when I click and drag, it's going to rotate that, like it almost pins it in place. So I'm going to rotate this thing over maybe about 30 degrees or so, and it kind of looks like maybe like the van hit it, knocked it over. We're going to come back and apply a little bit of a warp effect to this thing later on in the lesson. But for right now, we see how the rotate tool works, and we can just kind of knock it over that 30 degrees. Now what I want to do is I want to be able to transform multiple pieces at once. So there's a special set of commands that are built for that. What I want to do is I want to take these clouds, and I like them. I think the art looks great. I just think they're a little too big for the artboard. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on one. I'm going to hold my shift key, and I'm going to click on the other two. So I've now shift clicked all three of them. I'm going to go up to my object menu, and at the very top there's this transform command. So we've seen moving, rotating, scaling. We're going to see shearing in a minute, but notice there's this other one down here. It's called transform each. That's going to allow us to transform multiple objects. So I'm going to click on transform each, and it's going to ask me, well, what do I want to do to this thing? Do I want to make them bigger, smaller? Do I want to rotate them at an angle? And it's going to do all this at once. So what I want to do is I want to rotate these things down to about 70%. I'm not going to have to move them. I like the positioning. And if I click OK, it just automatically scales those pieces down. Now what I'm going to do is maybe I will grab them now that I have them all selected, maybe bring them up a little bit. I like how the text reads against that. It kind of gives it a little extra contrast. So I think that looks pretty good. And now that we've done some of these multiple commands, let's zoom in on this window. If you guys take a look, you'll see that there's like this kind of reflection effect on here. And it's actually really simple to create that. So what we're going to do is we're going to create that now for this window up here as well. I want to make sure that kind of the lighting is similar across everything. So what I want to do is I'm going to start by taking a box. I'm going to grab my rectangle tool. I'm going to make sure that my fill is set to white and my stroke is set to none before I even start drawing. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to draw a little rectangle here. And once I have my rectangle drawn, what I need to do is I need to use my shearing tool. And that's nested underneath my rotation tool. I'm sorry, underneath my scaling tool. So I'm going to come over here and grab the shear tool. And it's the same kind of idea. If I click outside and start dragging, here I can kind of start controlling this shape. So it lets me grab that object and kind of resize it. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to grab it along the top left and drag over a little bit. And notice I can go up or down to add more angle or more distance to it. And I think that looks pretty close. What I want to do though is I want to take this opacity. I want to knock this down to maybe 60% or so we can kind of see through it. I think that looks pretty good. So now I can take this, and if say I wanted to make another one, I can just copy and paste this. Maybe I want to make one that's a little bit thinner as well. What we can do with that is we can use that transform option to kind of squeeze this thing in. So now that I have this object in, I can kind of take it, and notice if I grab it just this way, it's not working exactly how I want. It's kind of just pinching the whole thing. So rather than transforming all these shapes, let's go to our direct selection tool. And instead of selecting everything, let's just grab this one. And I'm going to hold my shift key and click on this one as well. And now when I bring them in, it brings them in together. So rather than moving them, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to move those 2 points. And then I can slide the point over a little bit, get it where I want it. And then I'll zoom out. And now I've got my reflection piece kind of across my front windows as well. So now that we've got these kind of pieces taken care of, I think we're getting pretty close. But what I do want to take a look at is on here, this little kind of plant we created. It's kind of funky looking. And what I want to do is I want to make this thing look a little bit more completed. What we're going to do is we're going to use something called repeats, where we can take things, and there's different ways you can do it. We're going to do a mirror repeat, but you could do a grid repeat where it takes an object and just puts it into a grid. You can do a radial repeat where it takes an object and wraps it around a center point. What I want to do is I want to mirror in on this, or I want to zoom in on this and mirror this out. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit so I can see the whole thing. I'm going to make sure I select my object by grabbing my selection tool and highlighting it. And I'm going to go up to my object menu, and notice down here, about 2/3 of the way, there's a repeat command. And just like I said before, there's a radial. We could wrap it. There's a grid. We could make a grid of objects, or we can do this mirror. So now we've got this mirror, and what it does is as it gives us this separate piece, we've got this line that controls it. Now there's a problem with our mirror. I don't want to mirror the shadow as well. So let me undo this. And instead of selecting everything, I'm just going to select the plant shapes, not the shadow. Object, repeat, mirror. And then it creates a duplicate. Now, the part about this duplicate is that this line here, this is going to give me an anchor or way to control. So if I wanted to rotate it, if I wanted to bring it in a little bit, maybe I wanted to kind of come up and collapse on itself, I can use that. I can move it forwards or backwards, and notice it's going to just mirror that and use this as that mirroring line. Bring it in right around 90 degrees. I think that looks pretty good. Now that I have that there, I want to do other things to this. I want to take a look at maybe making a duplicate of this and kind of making like a top to this plant. So I'm still in my mirror mode, but I'm going to grab this object and do a Command C, Command V, or copy paste. And I'm going to bring it up here, and notice as I bring in the art, it's even going to show me what it looks like. Here, if I scale the art down a little bit, maybe bring it up towards the center a little bit more, I think that looks pretty good. I can even do this with color. So if I select this object, I can come in here, and maybe I'm going to change this color of this one to the same kind of tint of that van. And maybe I want to make this one a little bit smaller as well. And I'll hold my shift key to make sure I'm proportional. Once I'm done with this, all I need to do is hit this little back button on the top where it says back one level. And now this just acts like one piece of art. So now if I zoom out, I can take this, I can grab my finished piece. And I want to make sure that I grab everything together. And the easiest way to do this would be to probably just make it a group, right click or Command G. And then I'm going to bring it over here. It's trapped behind it, so I know I'm going to need to do an object arrange and bring this thing to the front. Here's my little plant. I'll just kind of set it in the foreground there. I think that looks pretty good. Last thing we're going to take a look at in this lesson is doing something called a puppet warp. What a puppet warp does is it basically takes an object and allows you to kind of modify how it sits. You can rotate points, and what we're going to do is we're going to almost put like these fake little pins in it. So what I want to do is I want to take this tree and I want to make it look like it's kind of wrapping back around instead of just being this stick here. So what I need to do first is select the object, and then what I'm going to look for is the puppet warp tool. Now, if you're not seeing a tool, remember you can always click on this edit toolbar and you can kind of look around, and as you hover, it'll show you where it is. The one we're looking for, it looks like a little push pin. It's a puppet warp tool, and it looks like it's hidden here underneath my free transform tool. So when I click on my puppet warp tool, it automatically puts me in puppet warp mode. So what I'm going to do is close this. Let me zoom in a little bit and jump back into my puppet warp. And you'll see I have like this little pin up here. So what I want to do is I want to add a couple more pins. I want to put a pin here because I don't want it to move. I'm going to put another pin here because I want it to bend around that. And then if I take this pin, I can reposition it. So as I click, you can see it almost acts like gravity, or acts like there's kind of a force there that's pulling along with it. If I select a pin, I can rotate how objects sit around that pin. I can reposition the pins. Maybe I want them to go higher. Maybe I'm going to bring this up a little bit. Maybe on this pin, I'll select it and I can rotate down a little. So that allows me to add all those different shapes and kind of add a curvature to any object. Now remember, these are multiple pieces that are selected together as a group. So when I'm applying my puppet warp pin, it's just going to apply that to all objects inside of there. So you zoom out here. Here's my finished pieces. I've got kind of my multiple little ads. It looks like kind of like a little series of ads for a website. Once you're done with this, what you're going to do is just like we've done before, you're going to stop and save this thing as a PDF. So I'm going to stop and do a file save as command. I want to make sure, again, I'm saving as a PDF because that's going to maintain all of my layers, or I'm sorry, all of my artboards as separate pieces within that PDF document. So let me save this thing off. I'm going to put it on my desktop. I'm going to make sure my format is set to Adobe PDF, and make sure you name things with your last name and lesson number. I'm going to save this off. Save it right in my lesson 5 folder. Default settings are fine. And then if I come back into that folder and pull this thing open, I should see these as all separate artboards right inside my document. So that's what you'll be sending over. Now the second part of what we're going to take a look at is something called SSR pixel art. SSR is short for scale, shear, and rotate. So what we're going to do is we're going to jump right back into Blackboard because I actually have the instructions of this process right there for you. So let me pull open our window, and right here where it says extension project pixel art, I've got like a little one sheet that kind of walks you through what the process looks like for creating pixel art. But what the idea is you're going to be creating isometric pixel art using these transform tools. So what you're going to do is you're going to create 3 boxes. You're going to apply a scale, a shear, and a rotate in very specific numbers, 86.062% for height, shearing -30 and 30, and then rotating -30, -30, and 30. And what it's going to do is it's going to give you 3 sides to a box that are going to fit in exactly. So what you're going to do is you're going to create one box. Then you're going to apply some color. So generally what I do is a lighter, a medium, and a darker color, and then I'll group it. And then what you're going to do is when you create kind of a series of these, you're going to stack them on top of each other. And there's a couple different ways to create this. Some people do like this almost like retro art where they'll just kind of do rows of like pixels. Some people will just kind of take bigger versions like I have in the sample and kind of create like more like 3-dimensional rough block art like you'd see like in the Cross Your Road video game. And then some people just kind of do some more like big block abstract art with it. So I'm going to leave it up to you guys to decide whatever it is you want to design. I just have a couple of examples on there. If you go take a look at like pixel art as just a Google search, you'll see tons and tons of results for it. But the big idea is that we're going to use this technique right here to build that. So what I want to do is on my document, I want to kind of walk you through what that process looks like. First thing I need to do is I need to grab my shape tool, and I'm just going to grab a box So if I press and hold, it's my rectangle tool. I'm gonna hold my shift key because I need to make sure that it's an exact square. And what I'm gonna do is to make sure they're all exactly the same, I'm just gonna draw one, and then I'm gonna copy paste. Stuff a little space between them. And I'm gonna copy paste this block 3 times. So there's my 3 blocks, they're all the exact same height. And now I've got my starting point, right? Now, if I want to, I can add my colors right away. So maybe what I'll do is just a series of greens. So maybe I'll do like a light green. Let's do kind of more of a medium green. And then for this one, I'll go ahead and do a dark green. Now, I also want to make sure that I don't have any stroke turned on here. I'm going to make sure my stroke is set to none. If you have a stroke, you'll see kind of seams. And you can see here I have all these built. I don't have strokes on any of them. Now, first thing I want to do is I want to transform all my heights to 86.062%. So that's going to be a scaling operation. I'm going to grab all 3, and I'm going to grab my scaling tool, just double click on it, and I want to do a non-uniform. My horizontal, I'm going to leave at 100%. My height is going to be that 86.062%. It's going to squash them down just a little bit. Again, it's a very specific number for them to shape correctly. So that's step 1. Step 2 is I'm going to have to shear these things. So my 2 right ones are going to go 30. My left one's going to go -30. So I'm going to do these one at a time. I'm going to grab my box. I'm going to grab my shear tool, and I'm going to double click. And I'm going to set this thing to 30. That looks right. Same thing here. I'm going to select this one, grab my shear tool, 30 as well. And then this one, I'm going to want to shear in the opposite direction. So I'm going to add a -30 to that. Again, all I'm doing is selecting the object and double clicking on the shear tool to pull open that text box. So now I've done my scaling, I've done my shearing. The last thing I need to do is this rotation so that I can get these things at the right kind of angle to snap all together. So I'm going to do a -30 and then 30. So with this one selected, I'll just go in the other direction. I'm going to grab my rotate tool and I'm going to double click on it. And this one's going to go -30. Same thing here. I'm going to select this one, double click the rotate tool, -30 as well. And then on my last one, this one's going to go 30 degrees. So let me select it, set it to 30. When I click OK, now I've got all my pieces in that exact size, in that exact shape to snap together. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to group these things. And I can scale this down. But what I do is I like to build a bunch of them, and I don't have to redo this every time. I can take this one, copy paste it, and then maybe what I'll do is I'll go in and just start changing my colors. So maybe I'll do a set of brown. So maybe I'll do like a dark brown. My top I'll do a medium, and my left I'll do a light to kind of create that shading. But then what I'm going to do is build a series of these things. They'll all be grouped together, and then I can use those to either start taking my shapes and assembling my blocks and copying and pasting to make more, and then just dropping them in and snapping them in right into that order. So with mine, this is kind of a couple different ones. Like here, this is one big block. Here's a couple little ones stacked behind. I stacked a few to make the legs. So if you're going to do kind of crossy road style art, you can just take blocks and scale them up or down. Or otherwise, if you're going to go in the direction of kind of more like this stacked pixel art, you can just kind of start building them and stacking them. You may run into an issue where with your sizing, I'm going to paste this one in here. Looks like I'm out of sequence here. If that happens, I grab these. And remember, it's all about your arrangement. I want to bring these things to the front so that they're stacked in order. So that's the idea behind building these. There's lots of different kind of pixel art style games or inspiration that you can pull from. Really, in the end, it's just about kind of playing through this process and then having a little bit of fun stacking these things together and playing around with arrangement and just getting a little more familiar with kind of building different style art and then also just different technique and different process. When you're finished with your pixel art, you're going to stop and save this thing as a PDF and email that to me. If you want to send everything all as one lesson file, along with all of this with the lesson file and the pixel art in one email, that's great too. So that's what I got for you guys for this week. Next week our next session will be taking a look at working with a pen tool. It's a really important part of Illustrator, really great lesson for you guys. So if you have any questions, obviously reach out. Otherwise, Have a great week, and I will talk to you soon.